Welcome to the BDN workshop series. Your moderators for today are myself, Dr. Tamika Fuller, and future Dr. Christopher Newman. Today's workshop is titled Restorative Circles, Check-ins, and Community Building in Academic and Practical Settings. Dr. Danielle Cooper is an assistant professor of criminal justice and the director of research at the Toe Youth Justice Institute at the University of New Haven. Terry Cooper is a practitioner scholar with over 19 years of experience in public health, forensic mental health, and emergency management. Mr. Cooper is a William Everett Anderson Fund Fellow and doctoral candidate in health sciences at the University of New Haven. I will now turn it over to Dr. and Mr. Cooper.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Tamika. Let me just step back. For those of you who have just joined us, we encourage you, sorry, I went too far back, to answer the question that we've also sent to you in the chat. What does community building in an academic/practical setting mean to you? Thank you who are able to be with us today, and for those of you who will enjoy listening to this over recording. As was mentioned, my name is Danielle Cooper, and our topic today is restorative circles, check-ins, and community building in academic and practical settings. This is a workshop where we look forward to engaging you all through the chat, as well as at the end, being able to comment through voice, unmute, and et cetera. And so we thank you for having this time with you today. Pass to you, Terry.
So we will begin. Obviously, I am going to do this agenda. We're going to do welcome and introductions. That's Danielle and myself. We're going to have an overview and a background. We have already started talking about activity, but we will talk more about our activities and our skill buildings that we have. And then we will have our recap with Q&A. So you've already gotten a brief introduction about myself. Yes, I am a practitioner scholar from both public health and emergency management. I am currently a Bill Anderson Fund or William Everett Anderson Fund Fellow. We are a group of BIPOC doctoral scholars studying natural disasters and disaster management across the spectrum. I have a bachelor's in science in food science from the University of Florida, a master's in emergency management, and a master's in public health, both from the University of New Haven. Along with that, I got a few certifications to my name and trying to add a few more. Very proud of those. My research focus right now is curriculum development that I hope to be graduating very soon with, looking at interprofessional education. And as you can see, part of my education was studying abroad, and this is a photo of me from Italy recently. Thank you, Danielle, you're up.
Just a little bit about myself, things that are relevant to the training topic that we hear today. I am an associate professor of criminal justice, but I also identify as a preventionist, criminologist, and researcher more broadly. My area is justice systems and criminology, but I've also taken the time to get several practical or community level expertise. And so I am certified as a prevention professional, both in the state of Florida and in the state of Connecticut, which is where I currently live. I have a very broad array of interests that I do research on. So not just youth as it pertains to their behaviors, but also how we manage different policy reforms, what is the experiences and the ways that we engage in differential punishment for individuals who are convicted of sexual offenses. And I do a good amount of work in research and training with police officers and discussing with them what are the dynamics that they have in dealing with youth or in general with fragile or marginalized communities that we experience complaining, protesting, demanding change right now about like police and community engagements. And this is the photo of me from Italy standing in front of the statue of Neptune. So the very next thing that we want to do, I know that we have a few of you who are here in this chat with us live. We want to just encourage all of you to go to the chat for a second. We want to do a check-in. The question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is low and 10 is high, how is your energy right now? And so we're going to just take a second Go to the chat. I'm going to also go to the chat. Feel free to drop in. How is your energy right now? 1 is a low number. 10 is a high number. Is there a reason that's because? What's the because ABC? You know, so I am excited to be here with you. So that's definitely perking my energy up. Okay, thank you so much. I see we have a 4, we have a 9, we have a 7. You know, in terms of the skills that we'll be building in today's workshop, this is just one of the very first that we want to model with you. If you have a chance to engage people, ask them how they're doing, ask them how their day is going, but especially engage them in how they might be feeling as they move into the work that you have to do with them. That's better, because otherwise you might have to make assumptions, or you might end up misjudging what you believe to be signs of their interest, signs of their energy. And so you just ask people how they're doing. So yeah, 7, and you just drove from Virginia to North Carolina. You know, that's another point. Once people check in and they start to tell you, because you also gain an appreciation for what it is that they were doing before, or what they might have to be doing after the time that they have engaged with you. Definitely, because you've been working on that dissertation. I'm glad maybe this will be a refresher for you. We hope that this is actually a good and fun conversation. So thank you to everyone who has checked in the chat. And I believe this brings us to our next piece. So now we have just a little bit of discussion about our overview and background. So we have a few objectives, right? One of the things that we like to make sure when we do workshops, especially with the Black Doctoral Network Conference, is do you get what we're supposed to be doing here together, and what potentially are the skills or outcomes that we're looking to bring you all to as you engage in this opportunity. First and foremost, we want you to be able to engage individuals and groups. What do we mean by that? We understand that you may be in charge of meetings, you might be in charge of classes, you might be engaging in group projects, you might be in a one-on-one. Any of those things are opportunities where you can potentially exert some influence or power in the flow of the meeting. So how are you engaging people? And I mean engage as an intentional word as well. How are you making it so that some people are not talking, some people are not paying attention? So what do we actually look like when we work on increasing that engagement? And then this acknowledgement that it happens in academic as well as practical settings. There is no one who does not need these skills, right? And so whether or not we use them, once again, in the boardroom or the classroom, whether or not it's for me to hold a community meeting with community partners, or whether it's for me to help my students when they're in their group projects, these are all skills, especially anyone who has a level of control, a level of authority or ownership over the meeting can use these skills to continue to help themselves create a productive space that is, you know, centered around community. We will cover some specific tools that foster positive relationships. So the emphasis here on positive, if you are not building relationships, if you're not working to add positive value to relationships, then that might be part of the reason why there's low engagement. If there is a neutral relationship or a negative relationship, then the likelihood that I am here to listen to you, that I believe that you care about me, or that I want to build anything with you is much lower. We also hope to help people communicate their intentions clearly. So if you're the one setting the agenda, setting the tone of the meeting, if you're the person who gets to speak to when other people are invited to engage, then how are you setting those intentions out to the room, letting people know that you welcome feedback? And so being very intentional also about inviting constructive feedback, letting people know it's time for us to debrief before you move forward. You know, so many times we're all overtasked. And so we make it to a point in a project where we finish, but the next project is already maybe started. The next meeting, the next thing to do is already on our mind, but we didn't really ask ourselves what would we have done differently. And we often collapse what is reality with ideal. So what had to happen in order to get it done versus like, if I had more time, more resources, more support, what would it have looked like? And so how do we actually give time and space to that conversation so that that can be constructive and that can allow for us to not just make it through and get through, when we can really soar and excel as part of what we have in mind. So we are back, I believe, to the chat. Went too far. In the chat, those of you who are here with us, we want to know, what are the settings, right? So I named some settings, but that might not be the settings that are most relevant to you. So when you think of the settings that come to mind that you work, serve, or lead in, where are you most likely to, experience needing the skills that we'll be discussing today, already using the skills? So what types of settings are you in already for yourself? You can see that we've got some things coming in the chat. We'll give it a few more seconds. People are acknowledging when you volunteer, you definitely volunteer organizations. Anyone doing any sort of community service, any of that falls into volunteer organizations. Higher ed nonprofit, right? Lots of still very businessy, bureaucracy things can happen in higher ed and in the nonprofit setting, others in the nonprofit setting. Just the idea of just, other places that we go, right? What does it look like to have meetings in school? I like the idea of what does it mean to have meetings in church. You all have named a lot of different settings that really are spaces. We just want to emphasize some for you additionally. See what? There we go. So what you see floating in is, like, for Terry and myself, there are a lot of different spaces in which we've seen the need for this skill set that has led us to collaborate and put together this workshop for you all today. Some of the things that are listed are my experiences. Others of them are Terry's experience. Many of you might be in a higher education setting where you have the opportunity to join affinity groups. That means that people who potentially have like identities or like roles as you are in a group together. That doesn't mean that just because we're like that we are actually, clear on what it looks like to build community together. Opportunities to be in national fellowship, like with the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, or to be running grants. You also see this idea of what does it mean to be in your doctoral fellowship or professional fellowship, also in your doctoral programs. Lots of meetings occur for you all as you are trying to strategize around your dissertations, as you're trying to pass comprehensive exams, as you're trying to even coordinate what it looks like to meet with your dissertation advisor. Other experiences that we have had across ourselves is like, what does it mean to be a part of the Federal Emergency Management Association programs and their national programming and training. The idea of being advising different groups, being a professional in many different settings. Each of these things, once again, emphasizes that there are times where we are in groups as well as in one-on-ones. Like I said, it's important if you're in a room full of people to have a community built, but it's also important even as simple as a one-on-one meeting with your supervisor, a one-on-one meeting with your dissertation chair, just continuously asking and challenging yourself, what does it look like in these settings for us to have once again, a positive relationship, for us to have tools that allow us to engage fully, intentionally, and with clear invitations. It's to you, Terry.
All right, so go ahead and click that. A few of the overarching themes or philosophies that we want to cover today specifically. First would be universal design for learning. Second will be Plaintree International. And lastly, we'll talk about restorative practices. So I do believe that volleys back to you.
Yeah, we'll tackle these together. Hopefully you are familiar with the concept of universal design learning, but if not, as Terry mentioned, like the idea that there are frameworks these are things that we've taken from those academic and practical settings and that we have then built into this workshop. So universal design learning is very common right now in the conversation of higher education. There is a lot of emphasis and what does it mean, not only to be accommodating to individuals with disabilities, but to really just continue to shore up the wider array of supports. And so within universal design learning, what we have first is this emphasis on engagement, like why do people need to care? Why do they need to be here? What does that contribution look like? What's motivating them? But also representation, like what are we using? How are we bringing things in? Who's being chosen to be speakers? Who's being asked to give speeches? Who's being given leadership roles? Who's being given tasks that are high value? When you think about that representation and how that once again overlaps with that engagement, those things allow us to once again reframe, like what does it mean to have community in these various meetings? What does it mean to be accountable to each other as a community? And last, but also still very important, this idea of action and expression. So then what does it mean to actually engage people in a way so that they can demonstrate what is valuable from the meeting setting? So if I'm here to learn, am I able to go demonstrate what I've learned? If I'm here for a meeting where we're working on a project, am I clear what my next steps are, what my contributions are? These are the ways and the kind of framing that the universal design learning is asking us to think about, because across each of these three things, they all overlap to making it so that regardless of your personality style, regardless of your identity, regardless of whether you're in a certain place in the hierarchy, if we have these three things in mind, engagement, representation, action, and expression, if we're answering questions in relation to these three things, then we're more likely to create a robust space in which people find themselves wanting to contribute, finding themselves feeling included and belonging. And these are the goals when we think about the type of engagement that leads to community building.
All right, so some of you may, and most of you probably may not have heard of Plaintree International. So it is a company. Plaintree International is a company out of Connecticut, and we are at the University of New Haven the first school to adopt this person-centered care technique for education. Next. So the things that we will be looking at in person-centered care that we then move over to student-centered care would be caring for the patient and their loved ones, or in this case, the students and their loved ones, caring for the staff, which does translate, and also caring for the community. So once you see in the Venn diagram, the overlapping circles come together to have a whole person-centered approach. And so looking at this from an academic setting standpoint, as an instructor, we are approaching students to show them that we are caring about them holistically in terms of what they have going on. Specifically, we deal with a lot of international students, and so their support structures are not quite the same as domestic students. So this approach has a lot of impact on them in particular, but in terms of other students, it also has a great impact. So with that, on our actual syllabi, we have a personal policy, and it's literally this: life happens. Please come and speak to me before or after class if you find yourself in a situation that will not allow you to meet a deadline. I want you to succeed. If you are feeling overwhelmed, I may be able to help or connect you with university resources, because your success matters. This statement actually does, it is the truth, but it translates to the students a feeling of being seen, like Danielle said, and a feeling of community, to understand that things that happen outside of class can and will affect performance inside the classroom. So being aware of that, doing the energy check-ins, trying to make sure that we understand where everyone is so that we can move on the same page is very appropriate.
Gary, I would also say that this really models, when we talk about what are kind of like the lessons that people are supposed to take away, it's a lot harder for me as a student or as a subordinate or someone else who's worried about needing, right, some leniency or consideration. if this policy already exists somewhere in my syllabus and some sort of discussion that we've had in the meeting, where we do understand that life happens and therefore you will not assume the most negative or worse things about me, and that I can come to you. So I have an invitation to provide you feedback, and I have clarity that that is like an intention that you want for us as a community. I think all of those are things that reduce a lot of the anxiety or avoidance that we see from people. We're still going to experience it because, you know, we are only one factor of how people might be engaging. But I think that at least by putting this forward, sometimes we have to just admit that students are our classmates or our supervisor. Sometimes they're wrestling or making decisions based off not actually us, not off what we say. So then the clearer that we can be about our own intentions, the less that we need to make assumptions about others, and the less that they need to make assumptions about us. We also want to bring you to a conversation about restorative practices. In criminal justice, we have conversation about restorative justice and peacemaking criminology, but the restorative practices actually represents a larger continuum of responses, especially when there might be harm that is experienced and conflict that can come from harm. So what you see on your screen is known as the social discipline window, and it has two core domains. So on the x-axis at the bottom, you see what does it look like for us to have difference in support. What does it look like if there's low encouragement or high, nurturing? But then on the y-axis, what you see is the domain of control. What does it look like if there are few limits, but what does it look like also if there's a high amount of discipline or punitiveness? And so in so many settings, people are in one of these three boxes, and our encouragement to you all is to really become more mindful that there is a fourth option. So first, within these three boxes, there's the idea of, am I doing things for people? So that's me being low in the control, but high in the support. So I just want to help people. How can I harm people if I'm just helping them? Well, what am I doing to engage them so that they are helping themselves? What messages am I conveying to the people around me if I never let them help, if I never let them contribute? And so being more mindful about what it looks like if you're being overly permissive and how that causes problems too. And then on the flip side is where I'm high in discipline and low in support. That's where I just am all stick and no carrot. I just want to punish you. I want to know, I want to do things to you. As in contrast to doing things for you, which was permissive, I'm now saying I'm going to punish you. I am going to stop you. I'm going to make some sort of action and take control. And that when I have low control and low support, it's really neglectful. I'm not even worried about you. I wouldn't know to care. I wouldn't know to offer support. I wouldn't know to yell at you or to hold you accountable or to set any deadlines. And so we really want to move out of the two or the not or the four and into the with. And the with is really where the restorative mindset takes place. This is what allows us to engage each other and say, what does it look like for me to share power, to deconstruct the opportunities so that it's not just my way, but that we discussed it together. And therefore the successes and the challenges that come forward with whatever it is that we've decided are still things that we all buy into. So is the agenda something that you have no idea about, you have no control over, and you just show up to the meeting? Is it that you have no control about when we meet or what gets discussed? Is it that you have no ability to have voice in the meeting about what we are deciding next or what our action items are? When I do things with people, they are more likely to want to do things with me. And so how do I use my authority in an authoritative way where I am still empowering people without over, taking the whole process, doing things to them, for them, or ignoring them completely and leaving them not in the conversation. So this brings us to our third part of our workshop, right? So we want to talk to you even more about how this looks like in terms of some activities. There are ways that you can set the tone for what it is that you're trying to achieve with the people that you are engaging with. And so we want to take a moment to just kind of encourage you that there's a lot of technology that's really useful to engagement with people. When you think about the fact that there are many settings in which people might not want to identify themselves while sharing their opinion, there might be too many people in the room. So maybe you're in a space of like 30, 50, 100 people, and it's hard to let everybody share their voice. When you think about the fact that maybe you want it to be structured, and so you already set it up. And so these are 3 tools that we're going to talk to you a little bit about some of them. So I just want you to know that each of these tools does have a free offering. So Restorative is available at restorative.com. It allows you to create quizzes that have up to 50 people in them. You can store those quizzes ahead of time. PolyV is very popular. It allows you to potentially have a 25-person audience size, but that it really also allows you like unlimited questions and engagement for the people that you want. And then Mentimeter is also a tool. It has no limitation on its audience size, but you have a limitation on the number of questions that you can have. So in contrast to Poll Everywhere and Socrative, which are really like polling tools, Mentimeter is more like an interactive slide deck in which you can build polls into the slide deck. And so, especially if you have resources, some people go ahead and pay for the paid licenses, because then that allows them to engage people at an even higher level. So I'm gonna go PolyV. Here.
You ready for me?
Yep. Do we need me to go back to the, no, perfect.
So this that you see now on your screens are the results from our Poll Everywhere poll, asking the question, what does community building in an academic or practical setting mean to you? So we see acknowledgement, productive development, community, accountable, assistance, proactive, success, means, intentional, connections, representation, self-care, creating. I think all of those words kind of resonate with me in different settings. How do you think about that, Danielle?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of community build, I think the word proactive is and productive, like these are words that really stick. I mean, I think we can all think of times where we've been in meetings where we say, what am I doing here? Why am I here? Would anyone notice if I wasn't here? And we're just asking ourselves, what am I supposed to do? How much attention? Or, it's that moment where you go to a meeting with another task, like, oh, maybe I'll get some emails done while I have to listen to this meeting, or maybe I'll, work on some sort of project. And so how do you get people to be present? Yeah, we have to think more about these connections and the building of those connections. Yeah. Before we move forward, I would also say, right, in terms of like what we're modeling for the skills that we want you to have at the end of the workshop, imagine if you were in a space and you ask people, what type of topics do we want for the workshop? You ask people, where should we be considering for lunch? You ask people, who should we bring as the next speaker? And you wait for people to raise their hands, but there's a dynamic that has to be recognized, that some people are more extroverted, they are more likely to raise their hands. And so how can you create an even playing field for contribution? How can you even out the invitation for that feedback? And so by making it so that everyone has a chance to contribute, and then, we just see the bigger words, right? So we can see which words showed up more and more and more, as opposed to just the 2 people who raise their hands all the time being the people who give the feedback. All right, I'll get us back into In addition to Poll EV, we just wanted to show you a little bit about what it looks like when you are inside of a Socrative classroom. So this is what it looks like from the teacher's view. And if you think about, once again, the array of tools, right? Down here, I have quick questions, which means I could have people, whether they're on a phone or a tablet or a laptop, sign into my classroom. People who sign in do not have to create an account. So only I, the person who's launching the activity, has to have an account. And so then with that, if I'm just in conversation, some of us, right, you're in a meeting, you raise a question, what is it that we'd like to do? And you struggle to get feedback. Well, you can just go ahead and make it a multiple choice poll. You can tell it how many multiple choices you want it to have, or you can also build in quizzes ahead of time. So I have the choice to be immediately in conversation and say, well, I'm just going to launch a short answer. I can orally ask that short answer question and then see people's responses, or a true false question or a multiple choice question. I also really like Socrative because what you see is this exit ticket. These are naturally already built in exit tickets. So then for me, especially at the end of a class or any other training or workshop where I'm like, how can I find out what landed or not with the people who I've engaged? The exit ticket has a standing set of 3 questions. How much understanding did you have from the materials covered today? What is one thing that you learned today? And then there's space for an open-ended question where the person who's launched the quiz gets to orally ask any question that they would like. So I could ask the muddiest point. I could ask, what resources you might need more, anything that I think might be useful. And once again, this is helpful in the academic setting, but it's also helpful in the practical setting. I've used these tools in trainings. I've used these tools in group meetings where as adults, we're trying to plan an event or we're trying to plan some sort of action together. And so each of these are resources. Once again, whether it's the Poll EV, the Socrative, the Mentimeter, any of these things make it so that we move out of this assumption that people who want to speak are people who raise their hand and say something, and that those are the people with the ideas, when there very well might be people who are much more inclined to take their time to think about what it is that they want to say. They don't want to have to speak out publicly, or they don't want to potentially be in contrast. Maybe you're also more likely to get conflicting opinions or less group opinions if you just ask everybody to give their own thought. And then as a group, you show them and discuss what the thoughts were, as opposed to once one idea is on the table, people feel like, okay, do I even need to move forward? Check-ins. Terry, you and I do check-ins in a variety of settings. Where are you doing check-ins these days?
Most recently, and usually I'm doing them in the classroom with my students. I think I actually also did a check-in at a fellowship meeting, a programming committee meeting. I tend to check in when I'm there to see what's going on with my peers and colleagues. And then occasionally I'll also do it in a professional setting, right, when I step into a meeting.
Yeah, professionally, I just had a chance to lead some trainings for faculty development. And, once again, when I'm trying to combat sometimes that we don't feel connected, sometimes that we feel alone or isolated, the opportunity to check in, give people a pause before you get into too much business, that's often appreciated. So we modeled for you all the check-in when we first came in, but we actually want to break down for you all the process so that you're more likely to use it in your own settings and spaces where you have opportunity. Once again, similar to the way that the technology tools were used, this is just a way to deconstruct some of the hierarchy or power that might naturally be in the room. Is there one person? Does that person call on people to speak? Is it that only some people raise their hands? Like, how do you know when to speak? How do you know how invited people to speak are? If you do a check-in process, then it is more likely that the intentions are clear, the invitation is clear. So just to show you all what we had you do, the first thing is to just clarify the check-in question. So we asked you all how your energy was, and then we also clarified the response type. We wanted a number. We wanted to know on a number from 1 to 10, where 1 is low and 10 is high. how's your energy right now? And we also invited you to tell us why. And so we also let you know that you could do that in the chat. You know, for us, it's also about an intention. Why do we want to do this? Well, I want to know how your energy is right now, because it's likely going to impact how I should engage you, right? So should I be more high energy? Should I be more relaxed and clear and calm in my tone? Is it, you know, it is powerful to let people know that you're intentionally taking time at the beginning of the meeting to get to know them, to hear how they are, because you care about things and how things are going on with them. So those are ways that you kind of have to continue to think and encourage yourself, but just putting it out there, hey, I want us to, continue to build community together. That might, just even stating that intention is powerful. Create structure, right? So we had you specifically put your responses in the chat, but if we were in person, we could have acknowledged a sequence amongst ourselves. So are we sitting in rows? Do we want to sit in a circle? But it doesn't always have to be a circle, as long as there's some sort of clarity and structure to whatever sequence, so that people know when it's their turn. You know what, Terry, I actually did a check-in earlier today, and I will say that this third part is actually a piece that when I watch other people do check-ins, they sort of struggle in. So the experience is that we all log into a Zoom meeting. We do the check-in where we say our names, right? Hi, I'm Danielle Cooper. I'm from the University of New Haven, right? But then we do the piece where we popcorn each other. And it becomes very interesting because we don't actually have that strong of a community. So, and we don't all show up to the meeting on time. So somewhere around halfway through the check-in, we don't know who's already checked in because we have such a loose structure. And even if the person leading the check-in, if they were just keeping track, then they would at least be able to kind of help move the flow forward. But we often come to a full stop where we say, okay, can you just chime in and unmute yourself if we've not heard you? And so creating that structure, giving people clear instructions, definitely helpful. Inviting them to participate. The reality is that what you think makes sense, you think people feel invited, you think that clearly you're here in the meeting, therefore you're invited to participate. It is still so strong to be clear with your invite. Let people know that you would like to hear from them. Let them know how you would like to hear from them. But also really important to the restorative process is acknowledging that not everyone might want to contribute all the time. And especially, once again, the technology allows it so that people may not have to orally speak about their thoughts. But normally in the check-in, people are still individually associated with their answers. So people might choose to pass. Maybe I would not like to share how my energy is right now. Maybe I would not like to share with you what I think are the next best steps. Do I have the right to pass? Is it clear to me that that's a welcome way to still contribute? Because otherwise, think about it. You also have people who just talk, and you're like, not everybody needed to make a contribution. Modeling the question and the response as the leader, that's just you also participating. So that's us sharing our numbers and things in the chat. Thanking people for their honesty and engagement. I actually don't know that we thanked you for your honesty and engagement, so let me do that now. It is not easy for people to participate in these restorative practices. I do think that it builds community, but sometimes the idea of building community is not comforting. Who are you building community with? How will that community look in the long run? And so people might not feel safe, and therefore they might not want to yield or give contributions of themselves. So for the people who did participate, who offered you and told you about their energy and told you why, and once again, there might be people who have passed, still thank everyone for their honesty and their engagement, because then that makes it more likely that as you continue to build and move forward in the future, that people will have things to say. So next, we just want to paint the picture for you all about like what happens when some things go awry, right? We've just got several things that we identified as being particularly troublesome. So let's kind of talk about these, Terry, right? So we'll start with communicating roles, right? this idea of who does what. Is this also an area where you've seen sometimes the community struggle, Terry?
Yeah, I was thinking about that in terms of roles, and besides the power dynamic, I don't really think that sometimes the community will understand their roles unless they've been outlined or explicitly explained to them. Because sometimes, like you said, some people are maybe more introverted and they would rather not necessarily step forward, right? They're not going to volunteer to speak. So, kind of for me, I think making it clear to the audience that they're, again, like you say, being intentional, making sure that they understand they will be expected to participate at some level, although they do have some discernment in the amount of participation. But yeah, making sure that we know what we're supposed to be doing and who's doing what is really going to be key.
Yeah, I've learned a definition of inclusion that says inclusion happens when everybody knows their contribution and knows how to chip in. And I think that sometimes the issue is that we think that there are no roles for us. So we show up, and just all the magic happens. So I don't need to take notes. I don't need to be the lead, And so especially, once again, if you're the person who's setting the flow of the meeting, use your power dynamic to communicate various needs of the meeting, right? So maybe we do need someone to take notes. Maybe we will need someone to do certain follow-up tasks. All of those are things that we want people to think about as they are trying to build that community. But once again, the roles are important, right? Just even the knowing of the roles, like, do we know the roles? Did we state the roles somewhere? I think sometimes, like when we, are you a chair that does it all, right? A chair who is then also, if you're not in charge of the meeting and you're looking to be supportive, maybe asking the person who is secretly holding all the roles, what's the best way that you can help them, right? Especially, this varies in the in-person setting from the Zoom setting, but even in the Zoom setting, sometimes it's saying like, hey, do you want me to monitor the chat? Hey, do you want me to let people in from the waiting room? Hey, do you want me to make sure that people aren't locked out of the physical room? Like whatever it is, the idea that we communicate roles and that we share those roles is a big part. Let's see what else we got. Check-in versus discussion. When you teach your classes, I know you do a check-in, but what does discussion and engagement look like for you in those spaces?
Discussion in that space comes in a couple of different forms. So I don't expect everyone to want to share their complete perspective and or opinion. So with the discussion, I let the class know that they can participate in a number of ways. So you could have a predetermined question that you want to answer. You can bounce something off of me, your instructor. You can comment respectfully, of course, on a peer or a colleague's statements or their questions. You can answer their questions, and you can ask your own questions. So trying to make sure that there are a few different ways for the learners in the class to participate in the discussion tends to help pull out some of those finer threads of the conversation, but also adds to the knowledge building in the room because everybody's coming with a different perspective.
Yeah, I think of the check-in, whether it's a check-in or a checkout, right? I think I'm trying to get everyone's input, but in discussion, I might still use the sequence or the flow, but maybe I'm just going to let one or two people, give feedback into the discussion and then wait until I've got another question and then ask the next two people and then wait till I've asked, instead of trying to make it all the way around. Individual versus group share outs. Do you use the pair and shares and things?
Absolutely. I think that small groups and think pair shares tend to get maybe a little more engagement, right? Because it allows for the students to then engage each other in their own groups, pairs or groups. And then rather than both of them having to speak And in a class with 20 plus people, that can get kind of lengthy, right? So then one of the partners or group members will do the sharing out. And that is a way to kind of like two birds, one stone it when it comes down to participation and making sure that everybody is participating in the class and that there's different levels of participation. So I really do like the think, pair, shares. That's to your point. Only the more vocal and kind of outgoing people are going to be willing to do more of the individual sharing without too much prompting.
Yeah. When I think about this specific area of troubleshooting, I think that there's also the opportunity to have people write down or even participate in one of those polls and kind of get their thoughts out and then still share out. So that kind of moment where people are like, I don't have an opinion, I don't have something that I thought of, they've already kind of written it out. And then the other thing that I was thinking about from your comment is, you know, I might be a 2, 3, 4 person communicator, right? Like if you put me with 2 people, then maybe I've got a lot to say to those 2 people and we will rock it out. But I have no intention to speak in front of 25 people. So then just even from that universal design learning, groups of different sizes, maybe I need to build a smaller community before I feel empowered to build a larger community. So it kind of chunks the community into different segments. Short versus long reflection times. Do you have, what do we do when people got a lot to say?
Well, you don't really want to cut them off. When you put it that way, I think about having a lot to say in terms of maybe long-winded, but also having a lot to say in terms of always having something to say. And maybe, you know, I've had situations where some students felt like they were oversharing. But in the same breath, I had their classmates tell me that they rely on the student who feels that they overshare to break the ice.
So it has purpose. It's not it's like, do you let it run too long? Meaning like, do you give me 3, 4, 5 long reflections, or is it like a kickoff thing? The other thing I think about is that the instructions that go with the invitation to participate are important. So I've had to modify instructions and be very clear, like, I need you to check in without a story. Like I want to know what you think. I want your feedback, but if it has to come with how you learned that lesson in order for us to get that lesson too, or just also modeling, right? So if I've given a very long reflection, then it is going to be more encouraging to other people to give a long reflection versus, you know, if I say, let's give 1 word that comes to mind or up to 3 words that comes to mind versus like trying to encourage people to think in longer narrative form. My instructions can really also help. I think even once again, if I've got a short amount of time, I might give them into a group so that they could report out like more of a synopsis of what they were thinking instead of each individual person telling me what they were thinking. I think those last 2 things kind of tie together really well. We got size of the group, right? Have you taught in an auditorium? Like what's the largest group that you've had to wrangle recently?
25 people is the largest recently.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate that I don't usually have to wrangle more than that. I've been present in much larger audiences, and I do think that that's something you got to consider for sure.
I will admit that I haven't been in an exceptionally large room and had to do a check-in in quite a bit of time. So the closest is like some of the networking events that I ran in the fall. But I will say this is a good time to remind ourselves that not everyone will speak if we're doing like a check-in or any sort of restorative circle. People could pass. So reminding people that is as welcome or encouraged. Having people, you know, do the group share outs, but still in the circle. That's one way to respond to the size of the group. The other thing is to like number the group, right? Like, so if I had 25 people, maybe I give each of them a number 1 through 5. All the 1s can check in this question, and then all the 2s will check in on the next question so that they still have the potential ability to pass, but they still have a sequence where they know that all the ones will be given that invitation to answer this question, and all the twos will be given the question, the chance to answer this question. I think the last thing I'll say about size of the group is that technology really helps. If the group is large and you can poll them, then that is a great strategy as opposed to having each person separately, because then you potentially, if it's true, false, or multiple choice, I now can see what a lot of people think, and that is being summarized for me instead of it being treated as if they all have some sort of separate answer. So if I want to know what's your favorite type of pizza, do I need to have everyone tell me their favorite type of pizza separately, or do I need to put together a poll so that I can see what are the most common types of pizza that people like? Those are some strategies. Let's see, we got one more here. The age of the group. What age groups are you most likely to engage with?
20-somethings, I think, is that age group for me. I'm usually with graduate students and returning students. So some of them may be up in their early 30s, but most of them are in their mid-20s.
Yeah, I deal with a very wide range of aged people, and I think that I would like to emphasize that community can be built regardless of age. So very young people still understand what it means to be included, what it means to have positive relationship, what it means to be invited to talk or play or contribute in any sort of way. I think that honestly, it's our younger and our older people who are more likely to feel excluded and therefore potentially value even more the chance to have like an equal footing in speaking, contributing, and offering things into the conversation. I would also say that if there is the age group and then just some people outside the age group, that you might realize that once you are in any sort of outside, right, but especially the outside the age group, you might feel like people of that other age group aren't going to listen to you. So if I'm the one or two older people and it's a group of young people who are deliberating, I might say, well, they don't really want to know what I have to think, and they have a different kind of perspective. If it's a group of older people and just one or two younger people, that younger person might similarly think they don't care about my opinion. They don't want to know what I think. Any other comments about these troubleshooting and variation topics? Perfect. The other tool, we talked about what does it mean when you have roles, right? Or what did we say? When you're trying to communicate roles. If you can be more deliberate with the roles, then it might reduce, once again, the hierarchy in which only some people ever volunteer to be the note taker, or only some people run the meeting, or only some people are taking, minutes or any of those things. And so this is an example of a wheel. You can Google a lot of different picker wheels through Google, but I think the main point is that how can you step out of just asking for a volunteer? And if it is an expectation of contribution to the community, then how do you just go ahead and get some level of assignment to it? So how do you use like a wheel to figure out who might you be selecting to do the things, especially so that you do not select the same person if you're in power. But also maybe you've been the person who's always asked to do that thing, always asked to take notes because you take really good notes, because you're dependable, because you come to the meeting on time. That has its own burnout to it, right? We fatigue from being dependable, and just letting everyone know that they could be asked to be a contributor, I think once again strengthens the potential for what we're doing. This moves us into our recap with Q&A. We have a few minutes where we can still answer any questions that you all have. And so we would love to know, how can we help you bring these tools into your workspace. And so what questions do you have for us? Either in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute, we welcome you to unmute and share with us your question.
So I just had a comment.
Thank you.
Your personal policy that you put in the syllabus, that's a pretty good idea. I never thought about putting that in the syllabus, but I do use some of that verbiage out loud when I'm going over my ICR and my syllabus. So that's a pretty good idea.
Carrie, do you want to comment any? How long have you been incorporating that in your syllabi?
So I've been in the classroom now 3 years. And so it's been 3 years, but like I said, it's definitely something that our School of Health Sciences suggests that all of the faculty, regular faculty and adjunct faculty use. You know, you can make your own personal statement, but I think that one pretty much encompasses like what we intend for the students to receive from us.
I would also add that one of the things that we are really challenged with at our university is cultural competency. We are having a robust growth in our graduate student population. Lots of those students, especially at the graduate level, are international students. And so what we're learning is like, how do we make less assumptions about what we think our clarity and what they could ask us for, how they could advocate for themselves. And so how do we create more of a clear invitation about what is acceptable? But also, you know, while that's a clear invitation, it also makes it clear that it's a lot harder to be helpful when you come much later, when the problem has already occurred. And so, you know, the next step is to help they read the syllabi. Other questions or comments before we wrap? Any final thoughts from you, Terry Cooper?
Thank everybody for their time, though.
We've got just a few things to remember that we want to share with you all. They'll begin with the end in mind, right? Terry is an emergency management and public health professional. We often joke that as preventionists and preparedness people, that it is really important to have this kind of situational awareness. I think this applies well within the idea of building community. So if you think about what is the value of community, if you think about what it would be like to be able to depend on people to have, then I think that when you struggle and you're frustrated when the community is not quite there yet, you'll have something valuable to kind of hold on to and encourage yourself with. And you'll be less discouraged because it is not easy to build community. We encourage you to give people a roadmap. We gave you a roadmap at the start of this session. We tried to paint for you what would be the things that you ended the session with. And we, each step of the way, made it so that you did not have to deal with any uncertainties as to where we were going with the overall presentation. If you've been in a meeting where you wondered if a topic is ever going to be brought up, or when someone's going to be invited to speak, or just any of the many feelings that happens when you are not presented that roadmap in a meeting, in a class, in a training, in any other setting that you experience, it just once again, it realigns itself with all of the frameworks that we invited you to consider. So how does Plaintree International encourage us to say, like, we have to not only think about the person we're engaging with, but if you think about it from a practical sense, the person in the meeting might need to go out and give information to other people, and then it might need to impact the way that they deal with the clients or the people that they serve in the community. And so if they didn't know that they should be taking notes, if they didn't know that the topics that were related to them were going to be discussed, then you've not only impacted the person in the meeting. Plaintree wants us to know that it's always going to have a ripple. Did you do it to or for or not with, including a person? Because the goal would to be with, this wasn't a situation where it was appropriate to give you all control over the roadmap. But in a class, I might say, when do we want to take break? What, when are we going to do this? Like, how do we break it up? In a meeting, or a training, I might give you those options. And once again, that's going to potentially make you feel more included in the overall conversation. Model and invite participation early. If you talk for 45 minutes and magically hope that in the last 15 to 30 minutes of class that people will open their mouths and say eloquent things, that's commonly not, it's just far from what we experience. So model participation, model that invitation, encourage people to talk to you, get them talking early, get them talking in a variety of ways. Is it through the chat? Is it through emoticons? Is it through a number? Is it through a word? Is it through an essay, through a poll? Any of those ways in which you encourage participation early on is going to make it that you have sustainable participation throughout. And then lead with questions when appropriate. There's a lot that can be assumed about each other's behaviors, but there's also a lot that goes into each of our behaviors that makes it difficult for us to really understand, are we correct with those assumptions? So it's just much better to lead with questions. Are there anything missing from the agenda? Are there topics that you all hope that we cover? Are there things that were difficult in the last meeting that we should discuss today? Like, are there things that anyone wants to take the lead on? Like, any of those questions that you ask and that you can build into the strategy and approach that you engage people with is more likely to make them feel engaged and like they want to participate. We have here for you in our closing a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. People fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. I think the dominant skill that we've emphasized here is communication, communicating that you want a community, communicating what the expectations of the community are, and that there is an invitation to be a part of the community. So Terry and I thank you, and we look forward to connecting with you through LinkedIn or through our email addresses here.
And thank you so much for all of the information you provided us with today.
Thank you. This concludes our session.
Okay. And thank you, attendees, for attending our workshop. Please remember to complete the evaluation. We placed the link in the chat, and we have a few remaining workshops left in our series. We have another one this evening at 5 p.m. Eastern called Navigating Leadership Roles as Black Women Before, During, and After the Doctorate. On April 22nd, we have our conference in Los Angeles. And then on April 24th, we have two more workshops, one at 11 a.m. Eastern, which is Join the Revolution, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, How Technology is Changing the Way We Learn. And then the second one is at 2 p.m. on the same day, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Implications for Higher Education. So thank you again.